Welcome to Accessibilities with Dr. D and Marquis. Hi, I am Dr. D. Giannetti, and this is my co-host and service dog, Marquis. High five, Marquis. Attaboy. Marquis, say hi. Good boy. Okay, lay down. So I do this show to highlight everyday people who happen to have disabilities and those whose lives are touched by disability. I've been sharing stories of people with disability. Many of you have asked me to share some of my story. So today, I'm going to share my story with traumatic brain injury, which is also called TBI. My recovery spanned 10 years and is still ongoing. So today is part 1 of my recovery. You will notice that I am using my laptop to cue me for what I want to say. I have a severe memory problem from the TBI. Using my computer with cues in large print is one of my strategies I've learned to compensate for my inability to memorize. And here to help me with my story is Robert Oliveri, the newly elected chairperson of the Wilmington Commission on Disabilities. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you, Dee. Thank you. You want me to say it's exciting that I'm the chairman now?
Yes.
It's exciting. I'm looking forward to working with you because you are our vice chairman.
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Question?
So can you explain, like for the average person, what a TBI is, or you see it as?
Yeah. TBI is the most challenging and potentially catastrophic of all acquired disabilities, which is disabilities that happen to you after birth. It is one of the most life-altering events that can be experienced. It's an alteration in brain function caused by external force that can either be blunt or penetrating trauma or acceleration, deceleration of the brain, which causes sharing and tearing in the brain. TBI is caused by non-reversible pathological alterations that require special training of an individual in rehabilitation.
So what is the prevalence of TBIs in our society?
So over 80% are considered mild. There's 3 levels, mild, moderate, and severe. Over 80% are considered mild TBI. About 20% of mild TBIs are lifelong, and I'm in that percentage. There are at least 5.3 million people in the U.S. living with long-term disability or needing lifelong help to perform activities of daily living resultant from mild TBI.
So you had indicated that majority have mild TBIs. So what is that?
The term mild is misleading. It doesn't go by symptoms. Mild TBI can be highly disabling. It's determined by 3 factors. The first one is loss of consciousness for under 30 minutes. The next is post-traumatic amnesia, which is no memory of events immediately before or immediately after the event of no longer than 24 hours, and a Glasgow Coma Scale, which is how you respond to your environment, of a 13 to 15. Also, alterations in mental status and neurological deficits. So for those with persistent problems for more than 3 months subsequent to the concussion, which is what happened, it's called post-concussion syndrome. And the collective symptoms consist of cognitive dysfunction, which is thinking abilities, like paying attention, concentrating, remembering, learning and memory problems, brain processing speed, executive dysfunction, which is the ability to plan, organize, and direct things, and physical symptoms like headaches, fatigue, dizziness, ringing in the ears, blurred vision, loss of taste or smell, and also emotional and behavioral problems such as irritability, sadness, depression, anxiety, all of these things combined and that don't just go away and for most last lifelong. So no 2 brain injuries are the same, so it's difficult to attempt to reconstruct a person's life. There's a lack of guidelines for diagnosis and for appropriate follow-up care.
Okay. So you had said there were 3 types of TBIs, right? Mild, moderate, severe.
Yes.
And you have mild, I believe you said. So how do those TBIs, or how does that impact a person or impact you?
Well, there are many losses, and they may include, it's all encompassing. Emotional dysfunction, loss of independent living skills, which is dressing, bathing, cooking, eating, things like that. Loss of communication skills, relational breakdown, and unemployment, all of which challenges a person's sense of meaning, their sense of self, and their basic human integrity.
Okay. Do symptoms show up right away?
Symptoms, this is the difficult part with diagnosing. Symptoms can take days, weeks, or longer to appear until you try to go back to work or resume your normal activities. Many TBIs are not even diagnosed for up to 2 years. You're not the same person you were. You don't have access to your coping skills, your usual personality characteristics, or your spiritual resources, beliefs, and philosophies. You lose yourself as a person. At the time of my TBI, it was said after 1 year of rehab, people could not progress further. They said one and done. Since my rehab time, and I proved through my experience and through my dissertation that I did get back to, it has changed to, with effective rehabilitation services and psychotherapy, one may again in their life create a sense of meaning and purpose, but they will never be the same. And due to poor cognitive and communicative prognosis, it's difficult for TBI survivors to speak up on their own behalf. So your worldviews are shattered, and you have to go through a process of identity transformation.
Okay. And so what was the cause of your TBI?
So years ago, I was in a first car crash that resulted in paraplegia. And then in 2007, I was in a second car crash. I was stopped on Route 93 in a line of traffic waiting to get onto the ramp of Route 128. A truck going 65 miles an hour came barreling into us. They didn't even slow down to stop. They just didn't see that the traffic was stopped. They threw us up into the car in front of us, which threw that car into the car in front of it. I was wearing a seatbelt, but I was sitting slightly sideways, and I slipped out of the seatbelt, and I hit my head on the dash, and then the seatbelt pulled me back and hit the top of my head. So I was knocked out briefly. My brain shook with such acceleration, deceleration force. And I don't have memory of most of that day. But the trunk of our car was pushed all the way to the front seats, crushing my manual wheelchair that was inside. And my service dog, Othello, at the time, had been laying across the back seat. But when we stopped, after we stopped for a couple of minutes, he sits up and looks out the window, which thankfully he did that day. And then Jonathan, who was driving, saw Othello's head flip-flopping from side to side of his headrest where Othello was pinned.
A little bit more. Okay. So some may wonder how you're able to tell your story with the injuries that you have, or how you got to where you are today, or...
Okay. All right, that's a little further down.
No. I just, yeah. Oh, you backed them up. I see. You backed up your pages. I didn't even notice that. Development. So, yeah, did your traumatic brain injury?
So you know what
Sorry about
happened?
that.
So then I was taken
How
to
were you
the
able?
ER by ambulance.
Yeah.
They placed me on a board and restrained my neck. They were very concerned about my neck. They didn't want me to become a quadriplegic. So apparently at the hospital, I kept telling them I had an excruciating headache and I was vomiting, but they didn't pay attention to it, and those are the signs of concussion. After taking x-rays and a CT scan and clearing me from further spinal cord injury, I was released from the hospital that day, which is what happens with people with mild TBI. I did have a sprained neck, a sprained shoulder, a torn rotator cuff, very swollen tight muscle spasms all through my neck and chest area, and that looked like I swallowed a jar of marbles.
So what were you doing prior to the crash?
So just before that, I had been working as a trauma therapist. I was also in a doctoral program for research and program development for post-traumatic stress disorder and co-occurring substance abuse. I had just finished all of my coursework, and I was taking a few weeks off before starting to write my dissertation. On June 6th, the car crash occurred.
So do you have any long life lasting effects from the accident or the car crash?
After the car crash, I continued to have frequent headaches with great intensity. I found I was losing my words and forgetting everything. I could not read, I could not remember things, and I couldn't recognize my own writing. It was beyond me. My memory for retaining anything was nil. My whole world changed again in that instant. I couldn't remember what people just said to me and kept saying the same things and asking the same questions over and over. I couldn't remember day-to-day events. Each day was new all over again. This lasted years. Also, my speech was monotone and very slow, and I had a speech impediment. And my thought process was slowed way down. I knew what I wanted to say, but I couldn't get the words out, and it took too much effort and came out too slow. I couldn't keep up with people in conversations. They were speaking too fast, and my brain couldn't process the information. And physically, I couldn't move my whole upper right quadrant, and my neck was in a collar. I was extremely fatigued, and that turned out to be a major symptom that plagues me a number of times a day. I have bouts of severe fatigue where your body and mind just won't function. It still happens at times now. It's a sudden, overwhelming feeling of craving sleep. My mind becomes a blank slate, and I had massive headaches.
So did these injuries or the symptoms that you have require any rehabilitation or therapy?
Yes. My PCP of 25 years, who knew me well, kept seeing me every 2 weeks. I was lucky. He was paying attention to the changes in me, not being able to follow a conversation or express what was happening to me, and my severe memory loss. I was so fatigued. I was only saying a half of thought, so I didn't make any sense, and I had the speech impediment. He diagnosed me with a concussion and later with post-concussive syndrome, which is traumatic brain injury. He also sent me to a neurologist who confirmed the TBI. As time went on, people just thought my new normal was that I no longer made sense.
So here's the question that I heard, this is twice now, so you should have it down pat, that I asked it. Some may wonder how you tell your story with the significance of the injuries that you had. How are you able to do that?
So my major recovery took over 10 years and is still ongoing. When I was finally able to write and further to think critically, which took a long time, I was able to get back to my dissertation after almost 6 years, which includes the journey of my recovery. So I have it written. I was able to reconstruct my recovery by assembling and researching all of my therapy notes and medical records. Also, I was a researcher before the car crash, so I innately started keeping a process and a field journal. The field journal was my appointment book, which was kept for me for the first couple of years. And my process journal was my emotions of how I was feeling about what was going on. So for the first 2 years, it was just in bulleted points with fragmented thoughts that mostly weren't decipherable. I broke up my recovery into 2-year periods for a 10-year period.
So 2 years. So what was your first period like? First period of 2 years?
So during the first 2-year period, on a scale called the Rancho Los something scale, it measures cognitive function, and my level was described as confused, inappropriate, and needing maximal assistance. This was the whole first 2 years. The patient is understood to be confused and does not make sense in conversations, giving fragmented responses, but may be able to follow simple directions. Memory and selective attention are impaired, and new information is not retained. The patient follows tasks for 2 to 3 minutes, but is easily distracted by the environment. So I had to take a leave of absence from my doctoral program, and I had to resign from my job. My doctor sent me to a speech language pathologist and also physical therapy. I had to learn to speak again without the impediment, which was like a stutter with an extra ah sound between every syllable. I had to practice making sounds and syllables into a recorder. I also had to learn to read and write again from scratch. So I had speech and language therapy twice a week. I had physical therapy twice a week and doctor appointments every other week. And this schedule exhausted me.
Yeah, I can imagine. So you had said that you had to learn to speak in basic skills. So what was it like to have to relearn those skills?
My first speech therapist worked for me for about a year, and we worked with speech and then started working with language. And I barely started writing, but only into fragments of half thoughts. I was so fatigued I would be too tired to say what I was thinking, or it would take me so long with my abbreviated attention span I would forget what I wanted to say for just one thought. It was hard to hold two thoughts in my head, right, Marquis? That's right. Okay, lay back down. Boy. My goal was to get back to writing my dissertation. That was my whole focus. It didn't matter if it sounded realistic or not to me. That was just my whole thought process, was getting back to writing my dissertation. And I also had a moderate word finding problem. So I started treatment by working with pre-primer books, pre-kindergarten. I started with letters and had to circle the picture that began like the letter F with a picture of a fox, and then onto the SH sound with a picture of a ship. I did worksheets to put animals and colors in categories and words that began with the same letter. And I used to get them wrong, which was really frustrating.
I can imagine.
And I could only work for about 15 to 20 minutes at a time, and that was all my brain could hold. So I also had a light and sound sensitivity, which I still have to a certain degree. All lights were extremely bright and caused a wave of nausea and headache. I heard all noises at the same decibel. The sound of the baseboard heat, the ticking of a clock, noise from outside, dog changing positions, sound from a radio, and a person talking beside me all came in at the same volume, which made it hard for me to pay attention to the person talking to me. It echoed loudly in my head, so it was like an assault of noise. So I had to limit my interactions to very small gatherings, if at all. I couldn't listen to a radio for many years. It was too loud and distracting. All noise was in the foreground, nothing was in the background. And that went on through about 10 years before it finally leveled off to a point where I could tolerate sound. My speech language therapist would write progress notes to me and email them to me so I could have a record of what we worked on, because I couldn't remember what we did 5 minutes after we finished. And then after almost 1 year of working together, she told me that she took me as far as she could go. That was devastating news to me. She said I had an adequate fund of knowledge to get by in the world. I was only reading at 2 minutes before my brain was totally saturated. My memory clipboard held very little information, and I told her my goal was to get back to my dissertation.
So when your speech therapist indicated that she had gone as far as she could with you, were you able to continue your therapy in any way?
I pleaded with her, and finally, she told me she had met another senior speech language pathologist from Spalding Rehabilitation Hospital at a conference, and said that he worked with higher functioning TBI survivors and with cognition. She also told me that I would not return to the workforce or my dissertation, but she did refer me to Rick. At Spalding, I ended up at Spalding Hospital, and I also saw a physiatrist who was my TBI doctor and had occupational therapy and assistive technology therapies there too.
Okay.
When I first met Rick, I still had a tremendous difficulty speaking and expressing what I needed. I brought a handful of papers with me, and I said, "This is me," pointing to my papers, and said, "Not this me." And what the papers were my 30-page research paper on the biological basis of behavior, differentiating post-traumatic stress disorder from major depressive disorder, my 5-page community service resume, and my stellar references from my master's and PhD programs. Holding the papers, I said, "This is the real me," and pointed to me and said, "Not this me, the old me and the new me." And that's how I saw myself. I wasn't a me anymore. I wanted Rick to read who I used to be and told him I wanted to get back to that me. So Rick became my life coach. I worked closely with Rick for over 10 years. With Rick, when we started reading, I had to learn about subjects, verbs, and objects, and that a sentence was made up of first a subject and then a verb followed by an object.
Mm-hmm.
I used to practice, and it would take me a whole week to write one sentence that I thought was complete. It took several years before I actually wrote a good grammatical, complete, simple sentence. And my organizational skills were gone, and my attention for following tasks. I only had 2 to 3 minutes, which made all new learning and relearning extremely difficult. But I did tremendous work with Rick. The thing that happened that was so different about Rick is Rick listened to my hesitated and halted slow speech patterns, and he encouraged me to continue to speak. He was adept at reining me in when I went out of focus and off on tangents, which happened all the time, halfway through a sentence. He made me feel more like a peer than a brain-damaged person with nothing important to contribute to my environment. Right, Marquis? That's right. He made me feel hopeful. I would say the same thing over and over to him without knowing it, and he never let me know it. He never said, "You're repeating yourself." He influenced me to believe in myself, even though I didn't know who I was. So, learning under Rick's tutelage, I began to gain a number of new strategies for my significant word retrieval problems, and we started reading a book one sentence at a time. It was a struggle to read the first half of a sentence and get what that meant. I would have to break the sentence down and keep reading parts over and over before I could comprehend what it was saying. The book was by a doctor of internal medicine who had a TBI, and this was her recovery. It was my first introduction to the world of traumatic brain injury, and the chapters were only like 10 pages long. It took me a little over a year to read that book with Rick, and that became the baseline for my speech, language, and cognitive therapy with him.
So after all of the therapies and exercises that you did, what were your daily tasks or roles?
I had a change in my work and family roles. I had always been the caretaker, and now I was the caretakee, and I had lived alone before. I was not even able to do many activities of daily living and could not go back to work. I flunked cooking and occupational therapy. I didn't have the memory to watch what I was cooking, and I kept testing if the water was ready to boil by putting my finger in it before stopping the thing.
Yeah.
So they stopped me from cooking. Meals were brought to my house and frozen in single servings by my friends, so that I just had to heat them up in the microwave. That also proved to be a big deal and hard for me to remember. So I had to learn to let friends and family help with things that I used to do alone, which caused a lot of its own problems. So the first 2 years I didn't really have a relationship to myself to know what was going on. But in year 3, I started realizing on some level there were a lot of things that I would never be able to do on my own again. I started realizing I was dependent. I had been my own worst enemy, trying desperately to be independent while not being able to remember what it was that I was trying to do unsuccessfully, not physically and not cognitively, which made relationships more difficult. I felt a multitude of frustration thrown at me, and I experienced the tired of others as resentment. People were really just trying to help me, but I felt like they were trying to take away the last little bit of control that I had. It was hard for me to reconcile all of my losses, but when I finally did let go of enough control, it was such a relief to have the relationships there.
No, I'm sure. I'm sure.
And that's a big problem with people with traumatic brain injury.
Is it relationships?
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, so did you have any other setbacks?
Yeah. So I went through the same first 4-year period. I went through feelings of worthlessness and depression in years 3 and 4. That's when I realized it. I had, as almost all do with TBI, issues with anger and frustration. My sense of humor was gone. My filters were gone. I had to learn not to blurt out how I was really feeling about something, which is another problem survivors of TBI have. I had to relearn patience and how to pace myself and to plan for everything that I did. And Rick helped me with all of that. In the beginning, that involved just basic daily care, and it exhausted me. I found I had an abundance of difficulty with attention, making decisions, concentration, trying to solve problems, understanding spoken and written instructions. I could no longer do simple math. Starting and initiating and executing tasks was extremely difficult, and trying to track things was almost impossible. I misplaced everything. And I was also very literal. My difficulty in making decisions, demonstrated that I produced either very late or no responses due to my slow brain processing. So many times I just could not make choices. The value of everything was the same to me. Nothing stood out. I couldn't prioritize. I couldn't justify whether to pay a bill right now or go try to pick out a shirt to wear, as they had the same import to me. And they all took an inordinate amount of time. I had a chart of 4 skirts and 8 blouses that all matched, and it could still take up to 2 hours for me to choose an outfit, which I found very painful to do.
I bet.
So at that point, I had also lost a sense of humor. I had lots of frustration. I lost my sense of awareness, and I had brain fog, which is another big symptom of TBI. I would go into a brain fog very frequently in the first 4 years. It's a state of total blankness, total oblivion, even though I'm awake, where I didn't know where I was. I had no conscious awareness and couldn't tell that I was in that state, so I also couldn't pull myself out of it. Someone had to distract me out of it, or eventually I came out of it and not realize what happened, or that so much time had gone by. It was a state of nothingness, just fog. I had a very difficult time relating to others. Communication was still markedly poor in this 4th year. I spoke so slowly, people would finish my sentences, but it wouldn't be what I meant, or they decided I just didn't make sense anymore, and they accepted that, which was really frustrating to me. I felt very detached from people. My concept of self diminished during this period as a TBI survivor. And for my journal, I wrote, I feel so removed and lonely. I have lost me, and I want me back. I operated in extreme slow motion, and every muscle in my body was aching.
That's quite
And so
an adventure.
that's part 1 of my recovery.
That's quite an adventure in that recovery, for sure. Congratulations that you made that, Dee.
Thank you.
A lot of effort.
And so my inspirational, notable quotable for today that I came to realize by this period was, how others see you is not important. How you see yourself means everything. So thank you for watching, and I hope you stay tuned for part 2. Thank you, Robert, so much for helping
it's
me
my
tell my
pleasure.
story.
My pleasure.
And I want to remind you that you can watch us on WCTV, on Comcast 99 and Verizon Channel 39. We're on YouTube. Look us up under Access Abilities with no space between the words. See the icon of the Statue of Liberty in a wheelchair. Click on it and you'll see our episodes. And we're also on Facebook. Facebook.com/Accessibilities2020. And please leave us a comment on there. Tell us what you thought of this episode. And if you have a story that you want to share it with us there. I can also be reached on accessibilities2020@gmail.com. Thank you so much. Stay positive. Marquis, up. Marquis, say bye. Say bye. Good job. Yay.
WCTV, connecting our community. WCTV, connecting our community. Wellington, Massachusetts.